I started from the question of how come some people enjoy other people's suffering? And then how come other people in the same society are just the opposite? They get their joy not in believing that there's bad people that need to be punished, but they get their joy in contributing to people's well-being. The first thing I'll suggest is you can't teach anybody anything. And to have that as an objective is itself to create problems. So let's change the objective. Let's never try to teach anybody anything or to change anybody. If that's your objective, you'll create resistance. Saying what we don't want doesn't make clear what we do want. But worse than that, if we frame our objectives in getting rid of something, it leads to violence very often. It makes violence seem attractive when we try to get rid of something. Behind every feeling, there is a need. When she hears your needs without hearing any criticism or demand, and you hear her needs without any criticism and demand, the solution will find you. The conflict will resolve itself. It does need to be resolved. But what most of us do, we skip this and go right to here. Needs contain no reference to specific ways of getting the needs met. Those are preferences or strategies or requests. So we make a big difference between needs and between preferences, requests, strategies. All needs are universal. Every human being in the world has the same needs. I'm not doing it for money. I'm not doing it to get a positive report card. I'm doing it because something that has increased joy in my life, it's joyful to share it with others. It's a fun game. It's the most fun game I've ever found, contributing to people's well-being. I'm really confident it's the most fulfilling game we human beings will ever find.
Hello and welcome. My name is Katrina Valancourt. I'm your host of Igniting Compassion. We are also co-hosted by Spirituality Gone Wild. Spirituality Gone Wild is an online platform that provides membership where you can get access to all of our videos as well as workshops. Please do feel free to find that at spiritualitygonewild.com. And today I'm so excited to have a couple very special guests. We have Kathleen MacFarren and Jared Finkelstein, who have co-authored a book on choice. And so I'm going to bring them onto the screen and then tell you a bit about them. So welcome, Jared, and welcome, Kathleen. Great to have you both here.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Great to be here.
So Jared believes that in a connected world, what's essential is the quality of our connection. As a consultant and trainer, he specializes in supporting people and communities to make choices that transform separation and misunderstanding into connection and collaboration. Jared is devoted to the idea of intergenerational independence. He works with organizations, schools, homes, faith-based communities, and camps, supporting people of all ages with the discipline of nonviolent communication, used to illuminate and fine-tune the qualities of connection in all our relationships and for everyone's benefit. A former filmmaker and media educator, Jared taught media literacy to youth in Poughkeepsie, New York, through the Children's Media Project, as well as through the Summer Institute for the Gifted, the Randolph School, and the Poughkeepsie Day School, before dedicating his time to disseminating skills and practices for conflict resolution and peace. Thank you, Jared. Kathleen holds a vision for a peaceful, just, and sustainable world. She's committed to co-creating a world where peace replaces violence, love replaces hate, equity replaces inequity, and all people live meaningful lives. She has worked as a certified trainer for the Center for Nonviolent Communication since 2003 and as a certified CNVC assessor since 2010. Since 2003, she served as a workshop facilitator for the Freedom Project of Seattle, Washington, an organization that supports healing and restoration inside and outside prisons through nonviolent communication, mindfulness, racial equality, and anti-oppression. Kathleen travels internationally offering facilitation, system building, and conflict transformation using practical skills that lead to reconciliation with ourselves, our loved ones, and our communities. She's worked with individuals, community groups, businesses, schools, colleges, faith-based communities, hospitals, families, prison inmates, and correctional and law enforcement employees. Kathleen is co-author with Jared Finkelstein of Choice, a field guide for navigating the polarization of our world and living interdependently. She's the author of children's books, How Giraffes Found Their Hearts, How Giraffes Got Their Ears, and conductor for Giraffe Tales, a children's CD setting, those stories to music. Kathleen is a conductor on multiple Rainier Chamber Winds classical music recordings, and her website is strengthofconnection.com, where her TED Talks, books, and music can be found. So thank you both for being here and joining me on Igniting Compassion. I'm excited about this book that you're releasing and really eager to learn more about what you've created in this resource book and in this manual. So thank you. And first, before we go into that, a question that I really love to ask people is, what was that moment that really ignited you to embrace nonviolent communication? What happened that had you go, oh my goodness, this is for me. I want to study it. I want to make it my work. You know, my heart is feeling resonance with this. And I'm wondering which one of you might like to share first.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thank you, Katrina, for putting the videos of Marshall up there. I haven't actually seen him firsthand for a while. And your question is flooding me with, there was a million sparks. There's a million sparks that kind of got me excited about nonviolent communication. And I read the book, but then the first time I saw Marshall, he was talking about how we talk to ourselves on the inside. And I remember hearing his talk and I went, oh, my children need to learn this. Oh, that means I need to learn it and live it. And so it was that compassionate voice that wasn't just compassionate on the inside, but also discerning. So that where I put my energy was actually in line with my values, and that there was a way that I could use this process to help me really kind of fine tune that. I can really, it would be my North Star for years. And so as you were talking about, you know, prison work and working with colleges and university, there's just this flood of experiences. And since that time that I learned about nonviolent communication, it's opened all of these doors into having these amazing conversations with people about how they too want to live their lives and how we can do that together and interdependently.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, I'm really loving the sweetness that I hear as you're talking about how you recognize the self-talk that we can do, the way we're treating ourselves through the voices that, you know, we may not even say out loud, that inner dialogue, noticing how powerful that is, but then the continued work that you did that works with both the inner dialogue and with the interpersonal dialogue. Thank you for that. Yeah, good. Love to hear your story.
You know, like Kathleen, there are a lot of moments that sort of, if I look back on, I think that this is really where this practice took a deeper root, and I discovered sort of a new area of subtlety and nuance about, you know, what it really means to practice nonviolent communication, to live nonviolent communication. My initial sort of you know, moment of synchronicity with Marshall was over a fateful car ride where my mother's boyfriend had lent me CDs of Marshall's, and I was going through a pretty challenging time in my personal life. And I took this 4-hour drive, and I sort of casually put the first compact disc in my car back when cars had compact disc players, and the car ride was one of the shortest car rides I've ever had in my life. I just listened to all 4 CDs back to back and was really struck by this profound sense of somebody articulating thoughts and ideas and feelings that I'd had my whole life, but with a clarity and a precision that was incredibly attractive, and that I knew immediately I wanted to learn how to teach these ideas and live these ideas that way. But I think really, that led me on a path to sort of seek Marshall out, to study with him. And I think the real moment of sort of epiphany for me, where I knew that this was a practice that I would have with me for the rest of my life, came later in a dialogue with him over a meal, when I was asking him about sort of reoccurring suffering. My father was killed in a car crash when I was 12, and I was asking him about how these occasions would occur where this intense sadness or anger or hurt or pain around that incident and the implications of it in my life would come up. I'd go through months or years without thinking about it, and then there'd be a birthday, or then there'd be a holiday or something, and these intense feelings would emerge. And Marshall just said that he thought sometimes the voice that needs the most empathy is the voice that says, I should be over this by now. And this was a major light bulb for me about sort of nonviolent communication not being something that gets over something or solves something, but rather is a practice for being in relationship with life as it is through this orientation of compassion. And that's when I realized that this is something for me.
Thank you for that. I'm appreciating the warmth in my heart that I feel as you talk about that. We might call it a jackal voice. I should be over this by now, and being able to bring compassion to, like, well, it's here. So let's honor it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So let's move into talking about this book that the two of you have co-authored about choice. And choice is a field guide for navigating the polarization of our world and living independently. I understand in this book you've gone through what in nonviolent communication we call the key differentiations, and so there's a number of these differentiations or distinctions that are used in teaching the principles of nonviolent communication. But because you have this idea of living interdependently right in the title, I'd love to hear you speak to what does this mean, living interdependently, as it relates to this key distinction of interdependence versus dependence and independence. How might you use that as an introduction to this piece of work?
I'm happy to jump in on that one, Jared.
Please, yeah.
Is that in my understanding of this work of nonviolent communication, interdependence is at the very heart and soul. It's built on a worldview that we are absolutely interconnected, that we are all part of an ecosystem, and that if needs for one part of this life system are met, it helps the rest of the system flourish. And if the needs of any one person are not met, then it's impossible to get the needs of the rest fully met. And so this idea that the interconnection is so strong, and that we actually have this combination of showing up fully with our full power, our full capacity, our full resources, that then supports the web. And we also lean into those that come from other people, that it's both this leaning in and giving, this natural flow of giving and receiving that keeps the web and the interconnection strong. And that being the foundation of kind of where this work invites us to go and leads us into it. And on the other side of the spectrum would be this idea that the world is separate, that we're not connected. And out of that paradigm gives kind of an either or of the sense that we're either completely independent, that I have to do everything on my own. I'm not connected to other people, so I rely on my own resources. And many of us have been taught that and have created a tremendous amount of resiliency that comes out of that. Or else the sense that I'm dependent, I don't have powers of my own, and so I rely on things that are, and people that are external to me. So there's something about really tending to all those different nuances. And I've been in all of those places at different times in my life. And the interdependence call is to both find the resilience and resources within me and also receive from other people. Jared, is there more you want to add to that? I know, Jared, I just want to say, Jared and I could talk for hours about these things. So Katrina, jump in and stop us if we get rolling.
Yeah, I'm also really touched and still sort of enlivened by seeing that short video of Marshall in the beginning, because it's been some time since I heard his voice, I heard his teachings. And I love that clip you selected about, we don't want to teach anybody anything. We want to, that creates resistance. And so, I think this differentiation between interdependence and independence and dependence, like those two things being put on in contrast with one another as a way of sort of expanding our awareness, opening up our consciousness. I'm inspired right now to really be precise. Like, I don't want to offer that as a teaching. I want to offer it as an invitation or as an option. And that I really trust that when we can sort of taste or have an experience of what it's like to be deeply connected and see that and hold it with compassion next to moments in our lives where we really acted from a fierce sense of independence or resisting dependence or whatever. When we can look at all of that compassionately from a self-reflective experiential place, that's where choice awakens. And really at the heart of, I think, the practice of nonviolent communication, and certainly at the heart of Kathleen and my book, is that distinction. Like, am I making nuanced, subtle decisions right now in my life based on some assumption of being an island and that my actions don't impact others? Or am I making that decision from an awareness that, of course, my actions impact others? And I think it's the subtlety of that makes, and the discernment of that makes this practice of NVC, of nonviolent communication, a lifelong practice, because there's a lot of nuance and a lot of subtlety there, and a lot of room for a greater sense of choice.
Yeah, thank you both. So one of the things that I'm hearing inside of this interdependence, as it comparing or contrasting it to dependence and independence, I guess I'm thinking of, like, when I'm a baby, I had dependence on my parent. There's nothing wrong with that. It's kind of it's a natural, healthy form of life to have that dependency. And then there might be, as a teenager, you want to create some level of independence from your parents so that you're able to create a healthy identity of your own. But then perhaps there's this maturation that happens when we've gone through dependency and independency, where we can be aware of both of those and also be aware of ourselves in a greater web of life, which includes, I have these needs, these precious universal needs as described by nonviolent communication, and you have these needs too. And let's see how we can play the game in awareness of each other's needs. As you said, we have impact on each other, and our choices also have impact on ourselves. So I'm hearing a distinction that helps to bring greater awareness to all of that. Am I hearing that as it's intended? Maybe I can ask Kathleen, if so I can choose one of you here.
Yeah, for me, what you said resonates so much, in the sense of that we go through different phases in our life and life cycle, when we might identify more with being dependent, like you said, as a child, a young child. That sense of it's the dependence is visible, right? That so many of my needs are met externally. But I can tell you as a mom how interconnected we were. Like my body responded to everything, every bit of communication that my babies gave to me. And so there was a sense of great interdependence. Like they had as much influence over me as I had over them. I really had that sense. But different times in our lives when I might be more dependent on people for physical well-being if I just had surgery or I have an illness. And then other times in my life, it's going to be really important for me to find out, how can I stand on my own feet, and who am I, and how do I make my own choices? So I really like what you're saying, is like being able to be aware of those needs, of how I impact others and how they impact me, gives me a lot of choices about which, am I going to lean on my own resources now, and how will that impact others? Or what's it like when I receive, and how will that impact others? So I appreciate you putting that together, Katrina.
Oh, thank you for that. I'm really appreciating the nuances that you've added. And it's also reminding me, another one of the differentiations we had talked about is this idea of responsible for and responsive to, which we could put that in the realms of parenting, or we could put that in the realms of any other relationship. And I'm wondering if you might speak to this differentiation.
Jared, I'm going to pass that one over to you, because you're actually the one who taught that one to me. Like you spelled it out, and I hadn't thought of it before. I love hearing how you describe it.
Yeah, I'm still thinking of the first question. So I feel like right now a little bit like one of the presidential candidates who, like, I have my moment to answer this question, but I actually want to go back to
Please go ahead.
No, it's a little of both. I mean, I just think, since your listenership is familiar with NVC, and this notion of needs, I think was one of Marshall's really inspired ways of giving language to help us see interdependence. And so I just love what Kathleen said. I mean, the common narrative is that a child is dependent on their parent for survival. But if you see life as an expression of love and ease and peace and connection and closeness and joy and all these other needs, it's just unbelievably apparent that the relationship between parent and child is interdependent, because of, just like Kathleen was saying, how many of those needs are brought to life and awoken in relationship with the child. And I think this idea, of narrowing what we mean by survival and what we mean by life into something about just survival, is one of the ways that we have kind of hidden the complexity and nuance of our interdependence. And so, as both a practice, NVC, and our book is meant to sort of find a compassionate way of bringing more awareness to how much life is always happening between people. And so, yeah, that segues nicely to responsible for and responsive to, right? Like sometimes people don't behave in ways that we enjoy. And sometimes I don't, I do something that I believe has an impact on somebody else, that I made happen, that I caused to happen, and that I'm responsible for how they feel. And that brings up a lot of inner judgment and inner consternation and inner, pain. And so this differentiation is meant to just invite a lot more reflection in those moments. How can I recognize that in an interdependent system, I sometimes cause harm? And as a person with white skin, like, I inherited a legacy of creating a tremendous amount of harm, and I want to be responsive to that in the world, to the impact of the legacy, to the impact of my unintended actions, especially in this moment in time right now, in this climate we're in. Like, how do I respond to the pain and the feedback that I'm receiving, and separate that from being responsible for it, from some story of having caused it or created it, or whatever, fragility or anger or pain or confusion that stimulates inside of me. It's not about either or. It really is about finding a clarity of separation so that I have a greater sense of choice. So I have a greater sense of being able to pick actions that are arising from my sense of responding to what I've learned about your experience, and do whatever other actions I want to self-heal or self-mourn or process about things I'm telling myself I'm responsible for.
Mm. Jared, I'm glad you mentioned like the issues that we have around the racial injustice and the gender injustice and other things. Like, I just want to say I wrestle with this key distinction all the time, because there is I may not have created the past, I may not have been born, and yet I'm completely responsible in this moment, having inherited what I did, on what I do with it. Like, I want to take full responsibility for what do I do with it? What do I do with my resources? What do I do with my privilege? What do I do with my learning? And so that piece I want to be responsible for. And then, just as you said, have that distinction between what do I want to be responsive to in other people's experience and other parts of the system. Otherwise, I find myself paralyzed if I confuse those two. So thank you for naming that.
Oh, goodness. I'm really appreciating that, especially in the context of historical racism. And then we land here in the now. So, I did not do the things that happened prior to my birth. And yet, by virtue of having white skin, there's a legacy that comes along with this skin color, and from the care of my heart, for my compassion for other people's needs. My desire to contribute has me wanting to be aware of it and to be responsive to, while recognizing that I couldn't have created something that happened before my birth, but I can be responsive to the aftermath that is happening now. And that's one of the other distinctions I remember you mentioning, is this idea of hearing criticism versus hearing pain, as it relates to this topic of how can I be responsive to something inside of the conversation on race, power, and privilege. And I'm wondering if you might speak to that.
Yeah, I'd love to link, Katrina, what you said about, like, I just want to bring interdependence back into this, because I want to be responsive to, not just because I feel compassion and that my empathy is awoken, but because we are interdependent. So even if I don't feel compassion, if I don't respond to meet the needs and bring about more equity, we are all going to suffer. So even if it's just in my own best interest, then I want to tend to that. I want to tend to that piece. And the other piece is, when I hear pain, what I'm hearing underneath it are unmet needs, the pain of unmet needs, the pain of the places where life is not thriving. And if I can hear pain, then I'm more efficiently pointed toward where the action needs to take place. Mm-hmm. But when I hear criticism, I'm caught in this other world that's kind of layered on top, and I'm not hearing the actual underlying needs, but I'm hearing the thoughts and the judgments that, again, get me lost in some cycle that is not putting my attention and my energy to the needs that need to be attended to.
Mm-hmm. I'm appreciating what you're saying here, and I recognize something that I had experienced a while back, was being accused of white fragility. And at the time, it was a new topic. I didn't even understand what it meant, but I could feel the ouch in it. And I recognized my own, like, white fragility. I'm feeling a bit defensive about that. I noticed myself taking it in as criticism and not even understanding what it meant and the pain behind it from the person who had said it to me. I'm wondering if this is one of the terms you've come across, and if you might use it as an example here.
I mean, yeah, of course, and this is the moment we're in, right? This is the discourse and the language that activism and social change agents and people who are envisioning a world that works for more people are using to try to create a sense of belonging and inclusion and equity. To me, what I find so empowering about that particular differentiation is really the emphasis on the word hearing. I think many of us don't get educated or aren't brought up with a lot of encouragement about choice about how we hear messages. And I think one of Marshall's great, legacies, giraffe ears, like the idea of what I can work on is how I receive a message. If I spend a lot of time trying to change the person who is delivering the message, I'm going to end up using a lot of force, a lot of power, and create resistance. But that I can choose to hear differently was a real eye opener and an ear opener for me. And so the choice to hear pain, to hear someone expressing pain, as opposed to hearing their criticism of me, is a choice I can make to create more connection. And as Kathleen said, I love when she brings it back to interdependence. That if I'm hearing your pain, I'm hearing your feelings. And if I'm hearing your feelings, I know those feelings have something to do with something that's really important to you. And I can agree or disagree with the topic or the content, but I can't agree or disagree with your experience. And so if I can connect to your experience by hearing your pain, then we might get back into that world of what are your needs? What are my needs? Where is there overlap? What's possible here? And move towards interdependence rather than independence. So yeah, and to bring it back to your example, absolutely. Like I'm touched by your process, hearing someone, say that they are experiencing you displaying white fragility, and struggling with how do I hear their pain, hear their needs, and how do I also honor that I am hearing criticism, I am hearing a judgment of me, and both those things can happen, but let's create choice by untangling them and seeing what needs are there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm recognizing in that moment there's that independent thought that I could go into, which is, okay, here's somebody who is Black, Indigenous, or person of color, who is now saying I'm white fragility. So I could go into the white versus non-white independent mentality that might have me more prone to a defensiveness or hurt feelings, like really going into white fragility, which is that my feelings come to the surface and I've taken over the show. And there's the chance to simply go, okay, this other person is having pain. Let me seek to drop whatever charge might be in me and jump into interdependence and recognize that their heart is so closely interwoven to my own heart in this interdependent framework, and seek to be the change that I want to see in the world and understand, which I wasn't able to do it in the moment, but I then did research white fragility so I could understand it and have greater compassion and hold greater space as that conversation arose again in future dialogues, because it is something that has been very alive as we're seeking to understand the dynamics of race. So I'm seeing that kind of that choice point there as it relates to your book between, am I going to view this through that we're separate, we're independent people, or we're interconnected, our hearts are interwoven in the web of life. So I'm seeing that as it relates to this book of choice.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering in this moment if there's another key distinction or differentiation that might be just bubbling up to the surface that you might like to share, either one of you.
Well, Katrina, as you're talking, there's so many. I just want to first name that your example of that in the moment of oh, there's pain in another person, there's pain in me, and leaning into it, I'm responding to the pain because we're connected. And then hearing you say, so I went and researched it. That's the responsible for piece, right? It's okay, I can completely relate to those opening moments of learning how my training in whiteness is impacting and not understanding the context because I wasn't raised with it. And so deeply every day learning and reading more history and understanding the concepts so that I can That's the piece I'm responsible for. The other piece, that one that's bubbling up for me, and like when we're talking about hearing pain, is that sense that sometimes when I hear pain, I really don't want to, because I think I'll be overwhelmed by it. And so we have one key differentiation where we talk about open to influence or overwhelmed by influence. So I really want to hear someone's pain and open. I'm open to be influenced and changed by what I hear. And in the midst of it, I also want to stay grounded in myself. I want to stay grounded in our interdependence. I want to stay grounded in our basic human needs, knowing that even in the midst of pain, the pain is grounded on something that's really solid. If I just spin around in the world of feelings and feel my feelings and don't connect them down to the layer of needs, then I'm likely to be overwhelmed by the feelings. So of course I don't want to lean into pain, or of course I don't want to lean into criticism. So how do I lean into and open to influence without being overwhelmed by influence, and then in a place where I'm not self-regulated, in a place where I'm paralyzed, in a place where I'm shut down? So that's one of the key distinctions that come up for me, is how to engage with pain in a way I stay grounded.
I love that, especially as we're looking at all of the political conversations that are happening right now. I notice how quickly I and others can get overwhelmed by influence, like block it. And I think there is some need for well-being. Sometimes, the amount of information that's coming can feel overwhelming. And yet, again, this choice point, can I recognize that there's a choice, that sometimes I'm feeling overwhelmed, and I can honor that, but sometimes I can actually ground and center and go, okay, am I willing to be open here? Am I willing to hear something that goes against my current way of thinking, but that might add maybe a greater context, or I like the symbol of the giraffe has the higher perspective. It can see more of the terrain because of its long neck. So it's a distinction I hadn't heard of before, is that overwhelmed versus open. So thank you for that. And Jared, I'm wondering if that brings up anything for you, or if there's another differentiation that is arising for you.
Not another differentiation, but sort of an unpacking a little bit of Kathleen, and my vision here. A lot of students of nonviolent communication, when being introduced to Marshall's key differentiations, or the differentiations we're exploring on this call, really see them as one or the other, as either or. And just listening to the two of you unpack open to influence versus overwhelmed by influence, like I'm just really reminded that part of the practice that Kathleen and I are really inviting people to do is to reflect on these two concepts from a really compassionate orientation, like to see the needs that are attempting to be satisfied when I'm overwhelmed by influence, to see the needs that are attempting to be satisfied when I'm open to influence, and to put them next to one another from this compassionate lens, with a lot of room to explore the subtlety and the nuance that lives between them. And so it's we're never all one or the other, and the idea of doing NVC well or good or correctly somehow gets caught up in this idea that I need to be on the compassionate side, and if I do that wrong, then I'm unfortunately on the jackal side. And it's an awful paradigm to be in that either or. And so choice, as Kathleen and I imagine it, in relating to these differentiations, or what we're calling them reflections, is about sort of, how do I see the beauty and the life being served in the extremes, to expand my ability to notice the subtleties, to notice, like, I'm at dinner and my partner is saying something to me, and this is a moment I'm just overwhelmed by influence. Like, how do I have the subtlety of noticing that then, which then gives me more options to respond in a way that acknowledges and honors, I'm a little overwhelmed right now. Or could we talk about this in 20 minutes, where I think I might be more open after I do this thing that I like to do? Like, that subtlety of understanding our own inner landscape gives us so much more power and resources for relating to others. But it's predicated on a lot of compassion for sometimes I'm overwhelmed by influence, and that's not inherently bad or wrong. It just means I'm prioritizing different needs at that time. So how do I look at that compassionately? How do I look at that with what's important to me, so that I'm seeing how even that's an effort at serving life?
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm really hearing the honoring that, again, everything we do is always driven by the desire to meet needs. So it's not like when we're looking at these distinctions, one is the enlightened way to be and the other one is the unenlightened way to be, but instead it's bringing awareness to when we might be choosing one more than another, or as you said, like where we are on the continuum of choice, to become aware of these distinctions and to go, okay, to what degree am I overwhelmed and to what degree am I open to influence, and based on that check-in, how might I navigate this situation in a way that's honoring myself and the people around me? Is that feeling resonant with what you're sharing?
Absolutely. The one sort of piece I'm always inclined to sort of add when the exploration arrives at this point is, as I'm scared of people playing with this practice as a way of self-rationalizing behavior, like the deep wish here of looking for the life that we're trying to serve when we're oriented towards what I'd call independence or dependence, is reflection, is discernment, is like grief if it comes up that I didn't know then what I know now, having done this reflection, which invites, I really want to emphasize the word invites, behavioral change, like, invites people to grow and learn from a compassionate wellspring. Because, I'm just scared of the sort of thought process that leads people to just rationalizing that, behavior that caused harm to someone, well, I was just attempting to meet these beautiful needs. Because from an interdependent orientation, even in the effort to meet those needs, there's an impact on the web. And so I what you said really does resonate for me, and is an invitation to that sort of wrestling. Anything you want to add to that, Kathleen?
Oh gosh, so much. And Katrina can just jump in. There's a couple other key differentiations that come up when I think of like activism. Like we're talking about the societal changes and politics, and what do we do with racial inequities? And then the continuum on the spectrum. Like I realized that there's some like needs and strategies that I value both ends of the spectrum equally. I'm actually not trying to only be on the level of needs at all times. I want concrete, specific strategies so we can create a world that works for all. And so part of for the activism piece is really getting clear about what are those underlying needs that we're all going for, even if we don't agree with the strategies. And to try to focus the dialogue, try to focus the compassion so that we can let go of the enemy images. We can let go of those images that will lead us to violence, and start having a dialogue about what's really going to work in our community, in our family, in our government. So that's one piece that seems really critical for activism, is be able to distinguish between needs and strategies. And the other piece that you talked about, Jared, is sometimes we just grief needs to come up. And so again, here's a key differentiation or reflection piece to really understand the difference between mourning and blame. And so when grief comes up, I want to invite myself to get connected to what are the precious life qualities underneath the grief that I can tap into, so that then I will regain strength and resource by tapping into those to continue on, and not go into the blame game where somebody else is then responsible for my grief and it's out of my power and control. And I've turned them into an enemy image, or myself. So those are like also in the grief process. I think we need to mourn so much daily for me in how I interact with our environment.
Thank you for that. We've been referring to universal needs so much. I just wanted to make sure people know that you can find lists of universal needs on these various websites, so that you can track, what are my needs and what are the needs of the people around me. I think it's just the most precious resource to have this list of universal needs, so that we can build that awareness. As you were speaking, Kathleen, I'm also recognizing there's a continuum between mourning and celebration, and how important both are to fully drop into the mourning when that's alive, and to take time to celebrate also the beauty that's in our day, to do a gratitude journal, to appreciate the people around us, as another continuum and an opportunity for choice. There's some other ones that I remember we talked about that are included.
Hey, Katrina.
Yes.
Before you veer away, there's one thing I want to add, because I'm so appreciative of you putting these links and inviting people to take a look at these words, these lists of words that we call universal human needs. And it just reminds me of another differentiation we have, another reflection that is really precious to me, which is this difference between essence and form. And the words, like the list of words, which there's no question, nonviolent communication is a language-based practice. It's using words, and so looking at those words is a wonderful dip into the form of NVC. But the words are like fingers pointing at the moon. They're like, they're in themselves, they are trying to guide people without teaching, but just through an invitation to experience needs. And the need itself, like that, which is, I can't express what the need is in words, just like I can't express, just like looking at the word isn't the need itself, is something to reflect upon and to look for, and to find a unique personal relationship and framework for of understanding. So I just think essence and form is a great way to even approach the practice of nonviolent communication. Like, what is it about this form of NVC, and particularly this list of universal human needs, and what is my relationship with what is ever underneath that word, or what that word is pointing to? What is my relationship with love? What is my relationship with peace? What is my relationship with safety? Where does it live in my body? Where does it live in my experience in a wordless way? Mm-hmm. And looking at the list of words might be a great entryway to that. But for many people, maybe practices that they already do that has nothing to do with looking at the words takes them to that same place of understanding. And my hope for the kind of connection and interdependence I want in the world comes from being able to relate in that place.
Beautiful, thank you. So I'm loving this distinction between form and essence, and I know that there's many other distinctions. We've only talked about a few of them in the book. I know you've got 3 sections to the book. You have the inner dialogue, the interpersonal dialogue, your connection to the world at large. I know you've got some things distinguishing choices and options. You talk about the continuum. You talk about the difference between reacting and responding, the difference between fluid and static as it comes to systemic change, respect for authority versus fear of authority, freedom, submission, rebellion, so many topics that can be really helpful for us to raise our awareness as it relates to life. But I think especially at this time where there's such a growing in polarization. And Kathleen, I'm wondering if any of those are rising to the surface, like, oh, I just want to talk about that one.
All of them? Can I say that every time you ask? Like, all of them?
Please.
I guess the one that comes up is like freedom and submission and rebellion is, and I don't have any answers to this, but I don't even know what freedom is. I see it on signs throughout the neighborhoods, don't take away my freedom or protect our freedom. And I want that. And then the whole inequity. Have we ever had freedom? What does it mean? So there is something about noticing when I'm in a space of, like, freedom to me is absolutely combined with interconnection. It has to exist within that context of interconnection. And so then to notice, am I in a place where I don't think I have choice, or that there's still, there's power differential here? And so my choice comes at a big cost. my choice might come at a cost of losing my job if there's a power differential. And so I want to be clear, am I going to say yes to this request that comes because my job is at stake? And so what I'm saying yes to is my own security, my family's security. That in that case, I'm going to be at choice to say yes to it based on those needs rather than submitting where I just do it because I'm trying to avoid punishment, or rebelling where I'm going to fight against. I think we find a lot of our activism work is in that place of rebelling. And again, it's not that rebelling's wrong. I don't want us to lose any of our passion. I don't want us to lose our anger. I just want us to find ways to bridge the gap in understanding so that we can move forward together.
Thank you. Jared, anything alive in you as it relates to this list of topics or any of the other differentiations in the book?
Yeah, I noticed when what's coming up for me right now is just to let listeners know, that one of the lines in our foreword that I really like is this is a personal book, and we'd like readers to take it personally. And that speaks to sort of how we would hope people would relate to the book. That it's a pocket-sized book. We call it a field guide. And it's broken down so that each page has one of these differentiations on it. And on the left side of the page might be open to influence, and on the right side might be its opposite. And that the reader then is invited to look at the language we've gotten on each page, which sort of enters from a first-person perspective. What might be at its most extreme the life that a person is trying to serve by orienting from that perspective, being overwhelmed to influence I might embody that fully in on the right side of the page, and being I'm not sure what I said before, open to influence versus
Overwhelmed by influence.
Overwhelmed by influence. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And then just reflect. That wherever they are, the reader at that particular moment, like hopefully taking a quick journey into these two extremes brings them back to the moment that they're in right now when they're reading the page, having been changed for having touched into the extremes of those two sides of the continuum, and then something might hopefully have moved inside of them to help notice whatever nuance they're at. Mm. And so that's sort of how the book's laid out. And as you were listing off all of the, many of the differentiations that are in there, what we call reflections, that came to my mind that, that it's not like a deep a book of long unpacking essays of each one of these, but rather it's meant to be an intimate relationship that you can flip through and take a look at particular pages as they might serve you.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like it really helps you to understand why somebody might make a choice in one end of the continuum versus the other end of the continuum. It helps to bring understanding to that, and at the same time, maybe hone in your ability to choose where you'd like to be at, to, again, kind of raise awareness about what's possible so that you can be in more of a conscious choice and ability to respond to life as opposed to autopilot reaction, which of course also it meets needs to have an autopilot feature as a human being. But does that match your intention? Is really to build compassionate awareness around this whole continuum of choices?
I mean, absolutely, to build compassion. I mean, absolutely, to look at our own behavior and our own moments of choice from a real lens of what life am I trying to serve, and can I become more aware of more life that I'm capable of serving? So I totally resonate with that. And I think, yes, maybe for people who aren't NVC practitioners, but certainly for NVC practitioners, there's a wealth of language for empathy guesses that exist on what we would call, the jackal side of the continuum, that Kathleen and I have spent so much time sort of looking at what might be the needs that someone's trying to serve by coming from being overwhelmed by influence, mm-hmm. that might serve someone who's struggling to integrate a greater empathic language in their relationships to make some guesses that they might not have made before. But again, like, it's about the personal. Like, it's a personal book meant to be taken personally. Like, if you uncover those revelations by reflecting on what we've written, then we're really delighted that we've contributed to that way. And if you don't, another favorite quote of Marshall's that I have is, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. So I'm comfortable with that possibility as well.
Yeah, Kathleen, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, just for full transparency, this took us like 6 years because we kept wrestling with them. And it's not because I was trying to imagine what it's like on the Jackal side of the continuum, if you want to call that, in those moments. It's because I lived there so much. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to have words for what that experience was like. Mm-hmm. Like every one of these key differentiations, Jared and I wrote every single word together and would spend hours knowing what it's like to be in that place of blame and not being able to move myself toward mourning.
Wow.
To be in that place of giving and receiving criticism and not being able to move myself to giving and receiving feedback. Like, I've lived in all of those places. We've lived in those places. And so it's, for me, I just want to be really transparent. It's the personal journey of how do I move to a different world in those moments when I'm really stuck, without any answers on how to do it. But it really comes from a personal experience, as well as inviting the readers into that personal experience.
Wow.
And I moved to reiterate what Kathleen said. It's like a huge, now that the book is published and out, it's such a huge source of celebration for me that we're really not exaggerating. Not a single word of this book was written in isolation. Like, Kathleen and I, our work process was to get on the phone, look at a Google Doc that we had all of our differentiations, and start writing, and then rewriting, and then going back word by word and discussing each sentence. And so there's something just deeply meaningful for me about having produced something in the world that's now out there and available in so much intimate collaboration, born truly from both of us, as opposed to anything coming individually. It's really very touching for me.
I'm so deeply moved to hear the level of detail and thought and care you've put into this book. And Kathleen, I was blessed to meet you a year ago inside of one of the TCCP weekends, where you are. I would call you the Grand Madre. I don't know that you would take that title, but my goodness, this has been your project inside of your passion for sharing NVC and empowering other leaders to really rise up. And so when you're talking about this being a 6-year process of really acknowledging your own challenge with the Jackal and seeking to bring compassion, to bring the tools to all of it, and to do that deep dive, my experience of you has been humbling. What I saw of you in that leadership weekend really epitomizes what I love about nonviolent communication. Your commitment to service, your commitment to really listening to everyone there, and caring about everybody's needs, we had a lot of people, maybe 40 people there, and really including the importance of raising up Black, Indigenous, and people of color voices inside the nonviolent communication world, which has been mostly a white world. There's all kinds of learning and growth that happens in that process, where we get to recognize in humility where we have blind spots and step up using these principles. And so I watched you do that over the course of 5 days, and am truly humbled by the example that you're leading in the NVC world, and appreciate that, even with all the experience you have, this has been a deep dive to acknowledge your own Jackal and to seek to bring more awareness to that, not only for yourself, and in partnership with Jared, to the rest of the NVC community and beyond that. So I just wanted to acknowledge you for the experience that I've had with you and really appreciate your leadership in the NVC world.
Well, Katrina, I don't know what to say. I'm kind of blown away by all of those words. So all I can say is, like, I learn all the time from people around me. Like, they are my mentors, they are my teachers, you included. So thank you so much for hosting the space you are to share nonviolent communication with the world and with your heart.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure, and I just want to let people know here is the cover to choice. This is it's on Kindle and in book format. You can get that on Amazon, and I'm going to add that link into our chat stream here. And I just wanted to see if there's any final words either of you would like to share before we close up the show for the day. Jared.
I'm still just sort of basking on that exchange the two of you just had. I really enjoyed hearing you reflect your experience of Kathleen and you using words that really resonate for me and how I've experienced Kathleen as well. And I was really touched, Kathleen, about how you received that expression of gratitude and my sense of you as someone who does continue to learn and challenge yourself and grow from the people in your lives, and grateful to have been one of them, both on a giving and receiving end. And Katrina, I'm this is our first opportunity to talk about the book with someone in a public format like this, and the hour has been really delightful and helped me sort of begin to think more about the language I want to use. And I loved your questions, and I love struggling with the answers, and I've loved your curiosity. So I'm in a really sort of open place right now of both gratitude and wondering how the experience will be integrated and what feedback people who watch it will have for us. And it feels like this book is finally going out in the world, and I really appreciate your support in that.
Wonderful, thank you.
I'm grateful to be on this team. It feels like a lot of collaboration and care and learning that's happened for me this last hour. So thank you.
Oh, beautiful. Such a pleasure to have you both on this show. And of course, I'd be happy to host you again as this book evolves in the world and as you have other offerings that are coming out. Just really great to have you. So thank you so much.
Love to be back.